In this video, I bring you a live apologetics training directly from my apologetics training community. This is actually a role play between two of my students who are tackling one of Christianity's hardest objections. It is the problem of evil, but specifically, why didn't God create us in a heavenly-like state? What makes him motivated to put us through so much suffering? In this video, you're actually going to get a showcase of the cutting edge apologetics and my 10 plus years of experience in being able to coach people exactly how to navigate conversations authoritatively and handle objections masterfully. You're going to get proven frameworks as well, and you're going to see them go through some awesome progress in real time. And again, if you want access and have this process done for yourself, link in description as well as the comment section. Without wasting any more of your time, let's jump right into it.
The setting that the real world is in. Like, why would God put us through all these like little things to try to grow us if in the end that's not like the setting that we're gonna be in?
Yeah, maybe courage might not be a great example of this, but maybe
All right, let's pause here.
like it's pretty plausible, especially given like the
All right,
value
let's
theory.
pause here for a moment. So, great discussion. What I want to hone in on is the first part of the conversation, which is the granting. And Nathan, that was awesome. You went off into the races with
Oh,
your.
I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't really see how I could grant anything in there, so I just answered a different way. My bad.
Yeah. Well, that's why we train, right? So we're trying to basically hone on this. You're fine, right? And Danny, I think that you're doing a great job. So let's refine that, right? Which was, Danny, your original objection was it's about compensation, right? So, and it
Mhm.
really helps understand what these objections are. It was about compensation. It was, well, wait a minute. It just doesn't make sense. If I can give you $1 million without hurting you, right? Then why wouldn't I do that? Like, why does that need to happen? I can just give you $1 million. This was Alex O'Connor's objection to me in Jubilee, right? Um, and so what we want to practice there, right, is being able to grant as much as we can, right? So when you say grant the objection, no, I'm saying grant as much as we can without showing that it bleeds in the problems, right? Right there. So an example of what you could have done there is you could say completely, I'm completely on board with you there because this is not about compensation. I'm not talking about compensating suffering. I'm talking about a different concept, right? So I can completely grant that compensation is not enough. And that's actually where I ended up being voted out on when I made that point right at the end. I would have gone into that with Alex. I would have explained to him the difference. I actually had to explain that to him when we went out to eat, that I was not talking about compensation whatsoever. I'm actually share common ground with him on that. So that's what you could have done, Nathan. Then you could have gone to your explanation of this is not a compensatory act. This is an act where you described a defeat. So let's run that back. Danny, do the objection again, and I want you to do Than's razor, right? Grant everything, shave off the conclusion that this is somehow a problem for theism, reintegrate it back into Christianity. All right, let's run it again. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's say we are in that the Christian God is the Christian God, or that is the worldview that you're adopting. And so you're saying that we're going through all this suffering, and that in the end we will be restored, we will be glorified, so that justifies the suffering we're going through. But let's say, for example, I tell you I'm gonna give you $1 million, but then I just punch you in the face. Like, that's kind of how I'm viewing it, so I'm saying, why was the suffering even necessary in the first place?
Yeah, Danny, I'd actually agree with you here that if that's how things are working, then I think that would be unjustified. And so we're actually on some common footing. However, I don't think that cuts against the Christian worldview because that's not the value system within which Christians are operating under. They see God not just giving a random disconnected reward to Christians at the end of life, but rather the suffering and pain is something that's necessary to integrate into a valuable composite whole that Christians will experience for eternity at the end. and then I'll just cut it there. But was that kind of what you're looking for?
Great. I love it. So this was the awesome part, right? Which is, yep, you granted all the way up to, but this is actually doesn't have any negative influence on the truth of Christianity. I love that part right there. Danny, good job explaining that. And I like how you then went into explaining the defeat there. And really what I would do is I would hone in on, I love the fact that you talked about some disconnected reward. That's not what's doing the justifying. But what I would do here, and so this isn't necessarily about technique, this is more so about content now that I'm getting into, which is
Sure.
get into like why this is relevantly different, right? I love how you explain the disconnected reward. I want you to go into the aspect here of this is going to be something that's worthwhile to the sufferer. Talk about the worthwhileness for the sufferer, because it's really hard to make God look bad if he gives lives to every creature who lives, worthwhile lives. Like if every creature who goes through suffering concludes their life is worthwhile and actually it was like, I'd actually do it again. It's hard to make God look bad in that scenario, right? So really drive home the subjective well-being aspect, right? So here's an analogy that I like to use. Imagine, right, two men go off to war. They're in the draft, and they don't know each other before the draft, but they bond within war, and they don't know if they're ever going to make it out alive. So they form this friendship and this bond, this in the trenches kind of bond and friendship, and then they realize that they actually live to the end both with each other. And they continue to have families afterwards. They're practically brothers. Their kids get to know each other, right? Their kids marry each other, all these different things. Now, was it necessary for best friends to become best friends and that kind of friendship through war? No. But what happened? If you were to ask one of those men, if it meant being able to have this friendship with your friend and being able to have the family and the life that you've built, knowing that it came through war, would you do it again? They would say, I don't regret it. Why? Because it's connected to this experience that they themselves deem worthwhile. And so because it's connected to the war, it's like, no, I don't wish away the fact that I went through the hardships of war because I wouldn't have met my friend, right? And so because of that experience and that friendship that they have, it actually colors positively their experience in war, right? So even though war is bad, because war was integral to this thing that they appreciate and they would never wish away, they know that it's necessarily linked to their experience of war. And so if they get rid of going to war, they would have never met their friend. So together, on the whole, they don't regret it, meaning they deem their lives worth living in context of the thing that they went through, right? So it comes down to really explaining how it's not necessarily the bad thing that happens to somebody, but how that person makes meaning out of it. And so for you, Nathan, the more the content switch here is like really driving home. How can I show them that how person makes meaning, how every person that goes through suffering has the opportunity to make meaning out of it, in a sense where, and this is what Marilyn McCord Adams talks about, where they recognize that God is good and loves them, and that they don't regret what they went through. So I love the language using non-composite, like composite whole, all that stuff like that. Really, really good. But it'd be that part, because analogies are really, really good. Our human brain, our primal psychology, we think really well within narratives, and so Danny gave one. I think a really good way for you to come back is to give one, and you don't have to use mine, but I think it's really, really helpful to find general analogies for these kinds of things. But yeah, no, that was good. That was good. So yeah, I think then we should kind of keep doing this. So let's reverse the roles. Nathan, you be the skeptic. Danny, you be the Christian. Let's change the topic a bit. Actually, no, sorry. We just ran through that whole thing. Nathan, you be the atheist. We'll do the same thing again, but Danny, I want you to be the Christian. I kind of want you to give a similar response,
Okay.
best of your ability, and then we'll go through whatever refinements we need to make on that. So,
Okay.
Let me get
same
like
objection.
Okay.
Same objection. Yep. Just phrase it how you want.
Yeah. So you as a Christian, you believe that the way that you're explaining the current suffering and pain that we see in the world, and the way that you're justifying your God is by saying that in the end, we'll be living in this, eternal pleasure, heaven-like place that you're talking about. But by my lights, it doesn't really seem like that justifies God, right? I mean, you can imagine, I cut your arm off, but then I give you $10 million to regrow an arm and then another $10 million in your bank account to do more fun stuff with it. But that doesn't justify me cutting your arm off, right? So yeah, I mean, I just don't think your account is God justifying.
Yeah, and I agree that that view of compensation it doesn't really make sense, and I would say that's not really the view that true Christianity has on our suffering and how God justifies us through it. So I would say that it wasn't in God's original intention or how things came to pass originally for us to go through this suffering. But obviously, it states through Adam and Eve's actions, sin came into the world, and that began to affect all the suffering and input all the suffering that we all experience today. And yes, one might say, why do we have to go through suffering for actions we did not commit? But I would say people all the time, they suffer because of the actions of others, and we share their same human nature. So who's to say we would or we wouldn't have made the same decision in that situation? And then through that choice, God still restored us.
Okay. Let's do some refinements there. Good work on tracking with the first part, which is granting. I love how you granted, and I love how you even went a little bit stronger. You were like, well, the true version of Christianity, like the way that I take that is, well, how Christians traditionally understand these things. You're not making an objection targeting that, and so it's kind of showing that this is almost like a failed internal critique. The modification I would make, right, is you started to include doctrines, claims, and theses that are going to make it harder
Okay.
for you to really get beneath the objection there. And so
Mm-hmm.
remember, we want to make the weaker claims, the more modest claims. So we
Okay.
want to really stick with the objection that he's making. What Nathan is saying is compensation, right, cannot justify something like cutting someone's arm off. Just because I compensated him doesn't mean that it was morally okay that I did it in the first place, right? You are correct. Well, yeah. Well, if that was the Christian view of what makes it justified, then we'd have a problem. But that's not the Christian view. Good. Now you need to explain what the Christian view is, which is this idea of the defeat of evil, which is this idea that what makes it morally okay, use the word permit. You can totally use the word permit here. What makes it permitting that the suffering that we go through occurs is that, remember, what does permit mean, right? It doesn't mean that God endorses it. It doesn't mean that God supports it. It's that it's authorizable. It's able to go through. Think about it like that. What makes this suffering authorizable is that the sufferers, the victims of suffering, will eventually be able to come to a conclusion for themselves that what they went through was worth it. Right? And then in that, God can then give them an amazing life. Right? So, what are the 2 points here? Right? That you have suffering being authorizable, not endorsed, and that you have the eventuality of creatures coming to the conclusion that their lives were worth living. Not in spite of the suffering, but in context of the suffering. So that's why I gave that example of, if you met your best friend through one of the hardest things you went through in life, because you know that you met your best friend in connection to the hardship, you wouldn't wish away that hardship, because then you'd be wishing away your best friend. Right? So the idea here is that God can give people these experiences in relationships to their suffering. Right? That there's no such thing as suffering where it's not going to be worthwhile for a creature. Right? So you can kind of use one of those other ones that you want to say there. So Nathan, let me be the Christian, you be the atheist. Say just real fast, because I'm gonna demonstrate different ways you can go. Say real fast, just like go real quick through the cut the arm off. Doesn't seem like it's okay. Like just make it fast.
Okay. Yeah. Seems like, you're justifying God by saying that all the suffering will be compensated with heaven and pleasure. But it seems like, if I just did something horrible for you, but then gave you a ton of money for it, that doesn't justify me.
Yeah, 100% completely agree. And I want to just say real fast that my view does not actually depend on compensation being what does the justifying. I think compensation is good for creatures who go through these things, but I think what actually makes it morally okay, like permissible for God to do this, is the fact that there's the defeat of suffering that is possible, what they went through. Meaning that every creature that goes through these sufferings, they can actually make subjective meaning out of it, such that they don't wish the suffering away, and that they'd actually even go through the suffering again because of the meaning that it adds to their lives. The one thing I want to add there is this is completely up to the sufferer. So there's no unilateral, uniform way to predict this. Every creature orients themselves to their experiences differently. So it could be the case that, like, for example, my arm gets chopped off. But what if, like, I become a motivational speaker for people who are disabled, who no longer think their lives are worth living? The meaning I get from my life as a motivational speaker as a result of my arm being chopped off cannot be attained without that event happening. And so in the whole, I actually deem my life worth living because I got my arm chopped off, and I wouldn't wish it away. And so I think that that's what makes it justifying. So I completely agree. It's not just compensation. There's going to have to be this subjective aspect where the sufferer comes to be thankful and not regret and endorse the life that they live in context of suffering, not in spite of it. So notice how I hit on all three kind of ways that I tried to show you guys there. So that's a way that we can do it.